Okay. All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started. It's not often that you get to have expertise of 4 very qualified lawyers and provided to you for free. So thank you to especially Rita, Yankton Thrive, Connecting Cultures, and all of you for coming to listen to this. I think it's very valuable information. We do have very vastly growing populations that have different statuses that are going to be talked about today. And to know a little bit about what categories they're in, how long their process takes, to understand what they're going through, to understand their needs is beneficial to you, whether it's the clients that you provide services to, or maybe at some point somebody who's hired by your organization. It could be helpful. So I'm very excited to announce the individuals that are here from Kivu Law. They're going to introduce themselves, and after they introduce, before they start going into all the information, I just want to do a brief your name and your organization so they also know who they're talking to provide the most helpful information. Okay, so my name's Sarah Brandt with Connecting Cultures, and I'll have the legal team introduce themselves and then the community.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Cece Lopez Jensen. I am the Kivu Law Fellow here with the firm. I am a recent graduate from the University of Miami School of Law, and I am also Cuban American myself. I know we've had a lot of discussions about the Cuban American community or Cuban community here in town, and I'm happy to be here and to be able to provide some information for you all.
My name is Jacob Bies. I'm a Yankton High School grad, SDSU grad, and Penn State Law grad. I'm an attorney at Kivu Law over in Worthington, just started there recently, and I'm happy to be back here in Yankton and providing assistance as needed. I know that this has been, the immigrants have been in Yankton for a long time, and I'm glad to see and bring together the people that are trying to make sure that their needs are met and that the community can provide them assistance and that they can contribute back to their community here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Erin Schutte-Wadzinski. I am an immigration attorney and the founder of Kivu Immigration Law. You'll be hearing more from me about pathways to permanent residency and kind of dissecting some of the nuances of immigration law.
Great. And I am Garrett Leffering. I am not an attorney. I'm the Associate Director of Employer Relations. I spent time in the medical sector in food and ag economic development. I'm deeply passionate about people, communities, and businesses. I believe when you can marry the three, a lot of great things can happen. There's a lot of unique and creative opportunities for employers to hire and utilize international talent, especially from higher ed. And so I work closely with employers, higher ed, the firm itself, ultimately to support our employers in the region. Thank you.
I'm Jesse Bailey. I'm here with United Way.
Lori Lincoln. I'm here with Yankton Area Mental Wellness and also Professor Emeritus from Mount Marty University.
Tom Hanser. I'm with Bienvenido Saw Brookings, small nonprofit, all volunteer. We've been around for about 5 years. We help the Latino immigrant community in just about any kind of way that you can imagine. We've gotten involved and try to help.
Sarah Klaban, I work at Lutheran Social Services, and I assist Jumelkis as a case manager.
Craig Kennedy, I'm with Connecting Cultures.
I'll go give it. Okay. I am Sarah Mechtenberg. I'm just a member of the community at large. My husband is an immigrant, and I am not a lawyer, and I recently shepherded him through the entire green card citizenship process. But I'm just here because I'm really interested in learning more about what you all have to say, and as just a personal advocate for our immigrant community.
Yeah, I'm Lacey Johnson. I'm with the Department of Labor and Regulation. I'm the office manager of the Job Service Office here in Yankton, and then I also oversee business services across South Dakota. So I have staff in multiple locations across South Dakota working with businesses. Their primary focus is recruiting and retaining employees, and so that's why I'm here today.
Hi, I'm Joni Bays, and I'm an outreach provider with ROCS, Rural Office Community Services, and we're one of 4 community action partnerships in the state of South Dakota, providing various emergency services and other services in 20 plus counties in southeastern South Dakota.
Hi, I'm Deb Lilly, and I'm the Chief Deputy State's Attorney for Yankton County, Hello, Mr. Peace. That's not a bad thing. I had him as a student. Not in the criminal justice system. And we're glad to be here, and thank you for forwarding me this invite.
Alec Martin. I work for the State's Attorney's Office. I run our diversion program. So I work with individuals from 10 years old to 17 years old for the juvenile diversion program, and then 18 to 25 for the young adult. And so I help the young adults navigate the criminal justice world. So.
Rita Nelson with Yankton Thrive and Connecting Cultures. So.
Andrew Ramirez, I'm a student at Mount Vernon University.
I'm Janaya Castro, and I'm also a student at Mount Vernon University.
I'm Lauren Rizak. I work at Yankton Thrive.
I'm Cora Von Olson. I'm a reporter for the P&D, which is the local paper.
Debbie Skokin. I work at Cornerstone's Career Learning Center. We do adult basic ed, so mostly GED and ESL, also workplace English and workplace Spanish.
And you know me.
And I just wanted, before we get started, you guys see my cell phone up there. It's not anything to be intimidated by any means. All I'm doing is recording it. It's not a video, it's just audio. And from what I could tell when I tried to do the first one this morning, it only really picks up probably those the closest to it. So we're probably not even getting picked up, but their answers are what we're most interested in, and hopefully that's what will be picked up.
So thank you so much for coming to this event. And Rita and Yankton Drive, thank you for inviting us and coordinating our day here in Yankton. It's been really wonderful. Over these 90 minutes, I'm going to give a very informal overview of some of the pathways for how immigrants can obtain work authorization in the United States and get on a pathway to permanent residency and U.S. citizenship. I'm going to focus in particular on Cuban immigrants because my understanding is that Yankton is in a really unique situation where Yankton is home to many Cuban immigrants and that this community has welcomed them, but there's still a lot of unknowns. Like the immigration system is really complicated. So I believe that in order to best help individuals, you have to be able to understand what sort of barriers they're experiencing and challenges that individuals are up against, especially when you're working with people who are different than you, right? And these trends are not brand new to Yankton, but I think Yankton is experiencing trends in a larger capacity than what they have experienced before. And it's really refreshing to see so many people around the table today representing so many service organizations and entities that have direct interaction with newcomers in this region. I am a native of Worthington, Minnesota, which is a town approximately the same size as Yankton in southwestern Minnesota. Worthington is home to a large immigrant community, primarily from Central America. So, in a generation ago, the immigrants that were coming to Worthington were from Mexico. And over the past 10 to 20 years, we've had a large influx of immigrants from Ethiopia, and then a large influx of Karen refugees from Burma. And most recently, Worthington has welcomed immigrants from Central America, namely Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Worthington does not have many Cubans, but Cubans are a fascinating group because the U.S. federal immigration system has created some very special tracks for Cubans that don't exist for citizens of other countries. And so I'm going to do my best to kind of share with you my understanding of these sort of special tracks, these unique tracks that Cubans have. And I'm also going to turn to our resident expert, Cece, to kind of fill in some of the details. But I'm here with 3 of my colleagues. Kivu Immigration Law is a team of 12, and we are a social enterprise law firm. And that means that, so Kivu Immigration Law is a PLLC, a professional liability corporation. We are not a nonprofit. We do charge legal fees for our services, but those legal fees are flat rate and below market rate. The idea of a social enterprise is that the mission is twofold. One is that we provide quality legal services, just like any traditional law firm. But the second important prong of our mission is that we create accessibility, education, and awareness in our community to ongoing immigration issues. It's important for us that immigrants feel empowered to understand their own immigration situation so that they can, first of all, help themselves, but also working within the community to help make it a more welcoming and warm place for immigrants to live. And that begins by helping our community understand some of the processes and challenges that immigrants go through.
The other component is that the Midwest is very short on immigration attorneys in general, and not only just any immigration attorney can be helpful to any person pursuing immigration routes. There's so many different tracks, like she mentioned, from different countries, and even within that country, your own situation depicts how you're able to navigate it, and that's why we chose Kivu to do this presentation today based on who we have in Yankton needing different immigration supports.
So, thank you, Sarah. I mean, Kivu Immigration Law, it's a hometown law firm. Like, I grew up in Worthington, and I went out to the East Coast to go to college, and I never thought that I would return home as an adult to live. Like, sure, my family's there. I have always called Worthington home, but I did not think, no points in my educational journey or career decisions were made to lead me back home. But it was the sense of calling to provide, to utilize the education that I had received and to provide assistance in a field where no one else was vying for that. And I mean, Worthington, like Yankton, didn't have an immigration law firm in town. There were not any lawyers who were willing to touch an immigration case. It is federal law, so attorneys often feel comfortable doing what they know, and if that is state law, federal law can be intimidating. Within the immigration system, if we have to go to court, that court is going to be in Minneapolis or Omaha, not at the local courthouse. So there are some, perceived barriers to entry, certainly. But I felt called to return home to practice immigration law because nobody else was doing it. And there were individuals who I knew, who I had gone to school with, who were not having access to the legal services that they need to have the fighting chance that they deserved to be able to stay in this country. And it was that passion that led me home. I worked at a statewide nonprofit first called Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota. That was the organization that offered me a job that brought me back to Worthington. And then about a year later, I applied for and received a fellowship to open a social enterprise in Greater Minnesota. And I thought, well, let's make it an immigration law firm. And Kivu Immigration Law was launched in 2020, perfect timing, right before COVID. And I thought that having me and a part-time legal assistant, we could do it. Well, no, that did not last very long. And 4 years later, we are a team of 12 full-time staff. We are a general practice immigration law firm. And what does that mean? People are like, oh, you only do immigration law? Well, it's like, yeah, we only do immigration law. But so many immigration lawyers will hone in on a specific lane of immigration law and not really develop a robust understanding of other elements of immigration law. Being the only law firm in the region, we don't have the luxury of specializing even if we wanted to, but we don't want to turn people away because we don't practice that specific type of immigration law. So we do work with employers, representing employers on their international hiring needs. We work with U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents who want to bring their family members to the United States. And we represent individuals themselves who are applying affirmatively for immigration benefits in this country, and also representing individuals who are in removal proceedings in immigration court, requesting permission to obtain lawful status and protection and permission to stay in the United States. So we have different teams, within our office that focus on different types of cases, but we really have this mentality that we want to do our best without sacrificing quality to meet the needs of our community. And I think there are unique needs that Worthington faces that Yankton doesn't, and vice versa. But I think the mission is there, and seeing all of you today helps me. It feels good to know that we're kind of all in this together. Thinking about specifically newcomers to this region, why are they here and how did they get here? Do any of you ever wonder that? Thinking about so we're going to talk about Cubans, and there are 3 popular tracks for how Cubans can come to the United States. There are a few other tracks as well, and Cece might chime in. But the first track is a track that anyone of any nationality may utilize to request permission to live in the United States. And these are essentially asylum seekers. Individuals who flee their home country due to violence, persecution, extreme poverty, weather disasters, whatever it may try to enter the United States and present themselves at the border, typically the southern border, without making a previous request to enter the country. And you may wonder, well, why don't they make a request before they come? Well, sometimes circumstances don't make that possible. Either they flee without much notice based on immediate dangers. Other times there's just lack of understanding for how one would go about applying for a visa in advance. Other times people don't have resources to navigate that process, and sometimes timing is an issue too. There are oftentimes, I hear stories about individuals who applied for visitor visas many times and got denied every single time. And out of desperation, they then approach the southern border to seek asylum or other protections in the United States. When this happens, there's typically, more often than not, individuals who come to the southern border have contact with U.S. Border Patrol, Customs and Border Patrol. And an immigrant is essentially arrested by Border Patrol and booked. And they're typically held in some type of holding facility, detention facility, or something, while the government can place them in removal proceedings. So it's called removal proceedings these days, but what I'm talking about are deportation proceedings. And whenever you have that contact with immigration and they process you, you are placed in removal proceedings, meaning that you are not going to get relief or protection from the U.S. government from anyone other than an immigration judge. And those individuals will remain in a detention center until they have their day in court, unless they are released on what's called an order of recognizance, meaning there's no room at the inn, the shelters are full, you will be released to someone who you know in the United States, sometimes released on bond, but you are obligated to show up for immigration court. Otherwise, you'll get an order of removal or order of deportation in your absence, an order of removal in absentia, as they call it. If you have an order of removal against you, it's very difficult to get that erased or reopened and apply for benefits in the future. So many individuals who you will see in the community followed that specific path and are in removal proceedings. The most common form of protection that someone will request in removal proceedings would be asylum. Asylum is available for people who have experienced persecution in their home country or have a well-founded fear of persecution if they return to their home country. Now, that persecution must be tied to a protected basis. A protected basis is a person's race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or a particular social group. Particular social group is the catch-all. It's a piece of your identity that you cannot change or should not be required to change. So this can be, you are part of a particular family in your home country, you have a particular sexual orientation, or something that it's you and you were persecuted because of it. But to win asylum, you also have to prove that that it was the government that did the persecution, or if it wasn't the government, it was a private actor that the government was unwilling or unable to control. In addition, to win asylum, you have to prove that there is nowhere, anywhere in your home country where you would be safe from that persecution. So as you can tell, there are a lot of things that you have to prove up, a lot of elements to an asylum claim in order to win. If you fall short in any of those elements, your asylum application will be denied. This is a very typical path for individuals who are fleeing their homes for whatever circumstance. And some Cubans are processed in this way, where they arrive and are placed in removal proceedings, just like anybody else.
Can you give a couple examples of other common countries that also might be seeking asylum, and then we'll go to the other Cuban stuff?
Sure. So what I see, Guatemalans, Salvadorans, Hondurans, that's Mexicans.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
There's a lot of Central America, and sometimes would you say also Venezuelan, even farther down, coming up through that. And then as she's saying as well, the whole fact that we're talking about, it is something that Cubans may experience, and they do go to Texas, and then they come up through the southern border. But being detained and acknowledged and identified and released with paperwork, they are here legally at that point, and they have the paperwork. It just depends on what's the next step after that, what they pursue.
So technically, so for individuals who are here with that paperwork and are in removal proceedings, they are not here legally. They are known to be here.
Known to be here, but it's not that they're hiding or
Right.
The government knows they're there, and they have paperwork that doesn't allow them to do anything sometimes, but it's not that they're here without documentation. Yes. They cannot do anything. They do not have citizenship. They do not have residency. They do not have access to a lot of things. But there are some pathways from that.
Well, and the pathways are typically forms of defense, such as asylum. But this pathway is the gloomiest because of the restrictions that are in place under law. There are two other pathways that are special to Cubans, and these other two pathways provide a very clear avenue for Cubans to seek lawful permanent residency in the United States without having to prove up all of those elements of an asylum claim. So let's talk about those two pathways. One is initiated in the exact same way as that first pathway that I mentioned. A Cuban arrives to the southern border and has not made any special requests in advance to enter the country. But declaring that they are Cuban, proving that they are Cuban, allows the Customs and Border Patrol officer to use its discretion and parole the Cuban into the United States. The officer has discretion under the Immigration and Nationality Act, sections 212D5. Sorry I didn't apply for a CLE for this to you attorneys, but thanks for being here anyway. The Immigration and Nationality Act is the framework of federal law that controls what Customs and Border Patrol officers and other federal agents can do and can't do. And this section of parole, or this section of statute, grants Customs and Border Patrol officers the discretion to parole a Cuban into the United States. And being paroled under that particular statute gives the Cuban a lot of benefits that they would not get if they were treated like an immigrant from any other country. So, for example, before I get too excited, someone who is paroled in under 212D5, they are still in removal proceedings, and they may still be held in a processing facility or detention facility for a short period of time, and they will still be scheduled for immigration court in the future. But they have an off-ramp. They have an off-ramp to apply for for permanent residency affirmatively, which is outside of the defensive environment of immigration court. And that's the benefit of being paroled in under 212D5.
Excuse me, are there any other nationalities that can be paroled under that, or is that?
No, it's only Cubans.
And that is specifically because there's something called the Cuban Adjustment Act, which is an existing sort of federal law that has been in existence since the 1960s that sort of affords Cuban Americans or Cubans that enter to the United States, that in particular affords them that. But there are other parole programs specifically for Venezuelans, Haitians, Nicaraguenses, but Nicaraguans in particular, that through executive action have granted them that parole benefit in different ways. There's something that came out under the Biden administration that has now been, I believe that is like phasing out after the administration ends. But it's something that it can be for other nationalities, but specifically what we're talking about is the Cuban Adjustment Act.
Thank you.
Yep. So we will talk in a moment about like how to go about taking the steps of like taking that off ramp and what it looks like to apply for permanent residency affirmatively through the Cuban Adjustment Act. But I want to kind of lay the groundwork for each of the three tracks first. The third track that is unique for Cubans is humanitarian parole. Now, this humanitarian parole program was through executive action, like Cece said, and it's specifically for people of 4 nationalities, from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. And individuals in the United States, Americans, or anybody can submit an application for a Cuban or someone from the other 3 countries to be paroled into the United States under this program. So the beneficiary, the Cuban, is outside the United States. They have not yet entered the country, but they make a request before they arriving to the border for humanitarian parole. And the U.S. government issues 30,000 humanitarian paroles each month for the 4 countries. And when this program started a couple of years ago, it was wildly popular and there were over 1 million applications submitted. The federal government realized that if we process these in the order in which we received them, it's going to be decades before people will be able to come in. And so while they have not increased their monthly allowances, they decided half of those, so the 15,000 of the humanitarian paroles provided each month would be on a first come, first served basis. So those who applied early would get it sooner. The other 15,000 each month are chosen through a lottery. So it's giving people hope to continue applying. And there are individuals who get lucky and get to come through this humanitarian parole. Now, and these individuals are not in removal proceedings. They do not go to immigration court. They lawfully enter the United States with advance permission to enter on parole. And their parole is typically good for 2 years. My understanding is that Yankton has welcomed many Cubans who have come on humanitarian parole through someone who has invited them or sponsored them through this humanitarian parole program. And there are many Cubans here who were paroled in at the border under 212D5. So there's a mix of Cubans here in Yankton who are in removal proceedings, who were paroled in under 212D5, who have to go to immigration court, or at least are scheduled for court, and should be pursuing this off-ramp. And then there are individuals who are here on humanitarian parole. They were paroled, they had advance permission to come to the country, and don't need to have an off-ramp. They just need to take the next steps to go from parole to permanent resident. Yes?
Oh, humanitarian parole, those applicants need a sponsor in the U.S.
Yes.
in advance of their application.
Yes. It is the sponsor who actually submits the application.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, we actually have quite a few Venezuelans that came that way too.
Oh, you
Just
do?
way less.
Okay.
Like if I have 300 Cuban students, I have 20 Venezuelans.
Okay, but you have Venezuelans too.
We
Okay.
do. And also some from Nicaragua, but they didn't come like this.
Mhm.
And lots of other places too, but, yeah.
So all of this is to say that an immigrant's the steps that an immigrant needs to take once they arrive here vary based on how they entered the country. And it's not easy for them to navigate independently. And if they're turning to service providers need to be able to look at their documents and figure out, like, how did they enter? And so this is where, like, us sharing this information with you will hopefully give you a little bit of a basis, at least for what to look for. But then it might also be connecting them with a legal provider who can help them, help to represent them in immigration court if they entered through that first pathway, or help them take that off-ramp before their first court date if they entered under 212D5. Or if they entered on humanitarian parole, they need to apply for permanent residency before their parole expires. Now, for Cubans, once they are here, as long as they entered through that second or third track, they were paroled in, they will be able to become a permanent resident through the Cuban Adjustment Act. Cubans also who come to the United States on a visitor visa or through some other lawful pathway and they're admitted or inspected into the country, they are eligible for the Cuban Adjustment Act, which means under this law, 1 year and 1 day after arriving on U.S. soil, they can apply for adjustment of status, as long as they were inspected and admitted or paroled into the United States. Now that first lane where I talked about, people having to seek asylum, they were not admitted or paroled, so they are not eligible for the Cuban Adjustment Act. And whether or not a Cuban is paroled or not is up to the discretion of the individual Custom and Borders Patrol officer that they interact with at the border. Also, any Cuban who crosses the border and happens to not have any interaction with immigration officers is not inspected and admitted or paroled, and so they would not be eligible for the Cuban Adjustment Act either, right?
Yes, and just because immigration law is so complicated, there are caveats to that, right? There are certain waivers or requests that you can make to the federal government to sort of give you a pardon for your unlawful entry, but that is very much case by case specific. But yes, there are certain caveats to that, but yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about like what is like how can one utilize how is one that is eligible to adjust under the Cuban Adjustment Act able to do it? Okay. If they were paroled in under 212D5, they are in removal proceedings and they have to speak to an immigration judge. It is the immigration court that has jurisdiction over their case. But it's a different agency in the government, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, under the Department of Homeland Security, that adjudicates adjustment of status applications. Well, how can we get that application out of immigration court and into this other agency? We need to inform the immigration judge that this person is Cuban, they qualify for permanent residency under the Cuban Adjustment Act, and that they were showing proof that they were paroled into the United States, and request that that immigration judge terminate the case in immigration court. Typically, you need the ICE attorney, the opposing counsel, the government attorney to agree to this. So it means having a conversation with that ICE attorney, explaining there's this thing called the Cuban Adjustment Act. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. But we want the proceedings terminated for this individual. If we can get that case terminated in court, then it's an open lane for the Cuban to apply for permanent residency with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And that's submitting an application for adjustment of status and a medical form. And it's presenting a very in-depth look at who the applicant is and showing the U.S. government that there is nothing in that applicant's background or history that should prevent the government from wanting them to be a permanent resident in the United States. So there can be...
Quick question.
Yes.
So just one question on all of these. Do these people have representation, legal representation in these courts?
So like in the criminal system, there's public defenders. There is no such thing equivalent to public defenders in immigration court. So immigrants have the right to counsel, but no counsel will be provided to them. It's at the immigrant's expense, and the immigrant must find the attorney.
Thank you.
To kind of go along with that, which court ends up with jurisdiction over a particular immigrant? I mean, how does it end up in the Minneapolis court versus the Omaha court versus the Dallas court?
So the Omaha Immigration Court has jurisdiction over South Dakota.
Okay.
So immigrants living in Yankton should be going to immigration court in Omaha.
But how does the court know which cases or which immigrants they are responsible for?
Well, so it is up to the immigrant to inform the office, the Executive Office of Immigration Review, which oversees all the courts, of their address.
Okay, so it's the immigrant's responsibility.
Yes.
And then that'll get it assigned.
Well, and it's two parts. So the immigrant is obligated to provide their address to the court, but if they move jurisdictions, they also must request that their case be transferred to the correct court, the new jurisdiction. And
But the responsibility is on the immigrant.
yes, and on the immigrant or their attorney, if they have one.
Because you'll see a lot of folks that get booked, let's say in Chicago or whatnot, and at that point, let's say they relocate with their families somewhere else. At that point, you have to inform the court, this is my updated address, and then either your attorney or yourself would then request a
Because my
transfer.
understanding is a lot of the folks that are in Yankton came here from Dallas or from Miami, and that was probably where their case was initially.
Well, and
assigned.
it's important for folks to know that just updating your address is not going to update the venue.
Got it.
So you also have to file a motion to change venue, which, and if you don't, you'll still have court in Dallas. And if you don't get to court in Dallas,
Exactly.
you run the risk of getting an order of removal and absentia.
Right.
A lot of our people just go back to Miami for their court date.
And that's nuts. So for individuals who are in removal proceedings more than anyone else, it's really important that they get connected to an attorney, because the attorney can move their court to the correct venue, and even if there's not enough time, if it's super last minute, can request to the immigration judge to appear virtually over video conference. And it would save the family hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to not have to make that trip for a 3-minute hearing, which is what those would be.
So what do you suggest, and the reason I'm asking is because obviously I'm seeing them for a criminal reason. And I had someone who said, I can't have this happen because I have a deportation hearing in Miami next week. And he was being put on some supervision. That's why we're here. Where do we send them? Because obviously I'm the prosecutor. It's my job to prosecute the crime you've been charged with.
Yep.
But as a couple people know, I'm not okay with that. I mean, we were running around trying to figure out, like, okay, how can I get the judge to modify the order to allow this person to not miss their deportation hearing? But who do I send them to? Because there aren't attorneys in Yankton that can help them with that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here.
Well,
Well, I think, okay, so for example, I would say, okay, if it was a Cuban, I would get help from Umelkis, because there might be an attorney now that we have on staff at LSS that could assist.
Well, if I could interrupt,
Maybe.
right? So one, it's a twofold thing. So we really have to evaluate sort of the individual criminal history of this individual and how it impacts sort of their immigration sort of case in of itself. But typically, public defenders have a responsibility pursuant to a federal case, right? And many public defenders' offices have something that's called a Padilla department or Padilla office, where there are public defenders that are particularly trained to evaluate whether there's a potential immigration consequence and then refer them out. So if that's not in existence with your public defender's office,
We don't have a public defender's office.
so that is definitely an obstacle. I don't know if you have anything to chime in.
yeah.
But the main point is, obviously he was telling me the truth because he came from Miami. So his hearing would definitely be in Miami, like, because he hadn't changed
Yeah,
to Omaha.
and he technically wouldn't be in compliance with the immigration court because he is living not in his jurisdiction,
Right.
but he really would need to get connected with an immigration attorney who can sort things out with him. And if he was represented by an immigration attorney at that point, then he would the attorney would have probably taken action to get the court in the case to Omaha, or inform him that, hey, we can appear virtually over WebEx. You know, both of those are better options than traveling to Miami. So there are steps that can be taken to avoid those like strenuous journeys. So a lot of law firms that will handle immigration cases just don't want to do removal defense. Our firm does. We do represent individuals in immigration court, and it's a big part of what we do. And I mean, we are overloaded on cases. We are extremely busy. We don't do a lot of advertising, and we're not here to solicit clients. But we want to be available, and we want to help. And we can do virtual consultations with individuals. They are welcome to come to our offices in Worthington, but it's not necessary. And then we would, in that particular circumstance, evaluate their situation and see if there's anything we could do to make the find a remedy that isn't quite so onerous on everyone involved. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, I don't know if you have percentages, but do most people immigrating get an attorney, or are many of them like floating out there?
There are statistics on that, and I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but the Executive Office of Immigration Review, I think, publishes those statistics. Too many immigrants, in my opinion, go unrepresented.
I can't even imagine doing that.
And I mean, the biggest barriers is that they don't know who to contact, and immigration attorneys are expensive.
And the third one, sometimes you can't trust them. They're not transparent. Are they doing what they said they were going to do?
Yeah, there
or
are a
are
lot
they
of
not
bad ones
scamming
out there.
me?
Yeah.
And something that should cost $3,000 and now I'm paying $9,000 or $10,000, money of which I may not have, but I'm sourcing it from friends, maybe an employer, maybe other family members. And so the access to a transparent, affordable, quality legal representation across the board is few and far in between, and that in its own is a challenge. But then you get that untrustworthiness of some of those others, which is scary.
So anyone in removal proceedings, I think it's really important that they have an attorney representing them in court. But it's also, I think, very valuable for Cubans to have an expert be able to help them navigate the application for permanent residency, for them to take that step from going from a parolee to a permanent resident. It's not a simple application, and there are many forms that go along with it. For those of you who are nodding, I think you must know what an adjustment of status application looks like. And again, that's like the big picture look that immigration is going to take on an individual to make sure that there's nothing in that person's history that would give the government a reason to not make them a permanent resident. And so those applications oftentimes are accompanied by an interview with an officer. It'd be either in Sioux Falls or in Omaha, where they like, oh, you've been arrested once and you've provided certified copies of your criminal history. Well, let's talk about that. And has there been rehabilitation? Do you have good moral character? There's a lot to. If there's anything negative in a person's history, you want to balance that out with positive discretionary factors. We know not everyone is perfect. People have flaws and things that they've done, but don't want to repeat. And anytime that happens, it's very important to demonstrate during the adjustment of status process and application that the applicant has good moral character. Okay. Again, Cubans are in a very special position that because of the Cuban Adjustment Act, they can adjust status in this way 366 days after arrival. And so there should be like a factory churning out adjustment of status applications in Yankton because of all of the Cubans that live here, since their eligibility, I think, is so vast. So adjustment of status to permanent residency is such a critical milestone in someone's immigration journey, because you must become a lawful permanent resident before you can become a U.S. citizen. Anyone who was not born in the United States cannot become a U.S. citizen unless they are a lawful permanent resident first. You can't skip that step. And typically, it's 5 years after becoming a lawful permanent resident that you can apply for citizenship. To be successful in that application for citizenship, you have to prove once again that there's no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to be a citizen. So, if a lawful permanent resident is convicted of crimes during that time as resident, that can jeopardize the permanent resident's ability to become a U.S. citizen. And there's a whole host of factors that you have to demonstrate in that application for naturalization or citizenship. And it's when you apply for citizenship that you need to prove that you can converse in English. So that interview, there's always an interview for citizenship that is with an immigration officer asking you questions in English. You don't have to be super, super fluent, but you have to be able to carry on a predictable conversation. And those of you who teach English classes and maybe do some citizenship classes will really help immigrants hone the specific vocabulary that they need to carry on that conversation. But there's also a civics exam that is required in the application, and this is an oral exam, meaning there are 100 questions related to U.S. government and civics that an applicant needs to study and essentially memorize. And you don't know which 10 of the 100 questions the officer will ask during the interview. And you have to get at least 6 out of the 10 correct to pass. These are questions that they are studyable, but those of us sitting around this room today would probably have a hard time passing that test without doing a little bit of studying, because it's not just general knowledge that is quizzed on. It's U.S. history and civics. So there's a lot that goes into that citizenship process. But if you successfully navigated the adjustment of status case and you breezed through that, you didn't have any issues, and there haven't been any issues in your history, in those 5 years from becoming a permanent resident to a U.S. citizen, applying for citizenship is something that one might be able to do on their own. We do represent clients in applications for citizenship, especially messy ones, but many individuals are successful in applying for citizenship on their own without an attorney. It's just the steps leading up to that I think are really critical, where if someone needs legal advice, that it's accessible, because there's all these on-ramps, off-ramps, removal proceedings, various laws, and it's challenging to navigate, especially for someone who's brand new to the country. And so that's why we try to break down those barriers. We don't break down all of them, but we do our best, and I think, together we can say, we do our best. So, yes.
I just wanted to add the reason too, in Yankton that's a little bit unique for individuals in our community to get that permanent residency is very important in our workforce, because we have manufacturers who have government contracts who require that individuals working in their facilities have at least permanent residency in order to work on the products that fulfill the government contracts. Some of them require not just permanent residency, but some require U.S. citizenship. So it just kind of depends on the contracts and which employers. So right now, for instance, we have one that was looking to hire 50 employees, and then they first have to be U.S. citizens while they evaluated the piece of the product that's being built here in Yankton and went, oh wait, they can be a permanent resident, but not until the product gets moved to our other facility do they have to be US citizens. So that's why even for our workforce and within our community, it's a very important piece.
Yes. And I just think that Yankton is blessed to be welcoming Cubans, because Cubans have these fast track direct lanes to permanent residency. In Worthington, we are working with individuals who all fall in that first track that I described, where they're in removal proceedings, fighting for asylum, and very few have off-ramps. And so it's important that this community takes advantages of the laws that exist to help these Cubans become lawful permanent residents. Rita gave a very good example about why it's important to become a lawful permanent resident, but there are so many more. And employers, I'm saying specifically, I think have a lot to lose if their employees do not take full advantage of their legal pathways in becoming lawful permanent residents. Permanent residency creates so much more stability and security than simply having parolee status or worrying about having to go to immigration court in Florida. So it's critical that they get on the right lane and move on it.
Just a question, do we know about how many people in our community are in this pre-residency sort of flux situation?
I personally know 300 of them.
I mean, that's a lot.
That's one person that knows 300.
Yeah, from an outsider's point of view, I think it would be hard to measure.
Mm-hmm. We were just discussing over lunch, how can we measure?
And for other ears too that haven't been a part of that conversation, because we've had it a bunch, as to how to get those numbers pinpointed to be able to then turn and ask for support from any organizations or, to help navigate some of the issues that are brought by having multilingual issues and all these other things. Like there are school district ESL numbers, but then there are a lot of families that come that don't have any children, or they're older children that are no longer in the public school system. And then, employers, it's hard to get numbers from them too sometimes, but then the ESL classes, we have some, and we have direct service workers, and then there's still people we meet that don't know the people that we know work with a ton of people within that category. So it's still something that we haven't been able to pin down.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And then I just have a question. So when someone is in a removal proceeding, so they're not a lawful permanent resident, what are, apart from this example that I appreciated about work restrictions, are there other restrictions too in terms of getting a bank account or a driver's license, or just like other example, rent, I don't know, they're able to rent or background checks?
Well, so again, Cubans are unique and are, as long as they, I'm going to pass out a handout here. So Cubans are generally eligible for a lot of public benefits that, upon arrival, that other immigrants are not. So they can, with a demonstration of certain documents that are shown here, they are eligible for Medicaid, SNAP, TAMP, other public benefits. So it seems like there are resources in the community to plug them into getting those benefits and applying for a driver's license, getting a social security card and things like that. But those benefits are available, and those benefits are not available to all newcomers. So the fact that Cubans have access to those benefits, again, is pretty special.
have lots of students too that are working on the hog farms and dairy farms all scattered along here, and they're mostly from Mexico with temporary work visas. So are usually 2 years, is that right, and then renewed? Is that renewed every 2 years? That seems to be what's typical of what Pipestone is doing. But
Okay.
I don't know if that's normal, but.
So there are many different types of temporary work visas. You're working with Pipestone, or they're working with Pipestone Systems, is that right? So no, I know that company, and they do a lot of TNs.
Yes.
TN visas.
Yes.
TN visas are a temporary work visa for Mexicans and Canadians, because the TN visa was part of something negotiated in the NAFTA agreement. And TN visas are good for 3 years.
Oh, 3, okay.
And can be renewed every 3 years forever, essentially.
Yep.
But the TN visa is only for people filling professional occupations by individuals who have a minimum of a bachelor's degree.
They're mostly vet techs from
Yep.
Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
working, inseminating the animals or like something
Yes.
like that, yeah.
Yep. So TN visas, it does not provide a pathway to permanent residency, but it is kind of a continuous work visa to lawfully work in the United States.
I have a question. So with the work, kind of knowing where we are in our Yankton community and the makeup of our Yankton community, and we're just starting this pathway, do you have best practices? What are recommended, the steps or the process that we should look to organize that could support the individuals in our community with the resource or to make those connections? I guess that's why we're called Connecting Cultures a little bit. We want to make
Thoughts?
connections. So I'm just curious if you have some recommendations.
Well, I think, what works for one community might not work for another. And so I'm not going to sit here telling Yankton what Yankton should do. One model that I really like the idea of is having a welcoming hub, like a central, like a one-stop shop place for newcomers to go and seek the resources that they need. I think creating that one-stop shop is easier said than done, but
I see Tom laughing, so I think that's what he's here for.
There's a line that goes north and south, and on one part of the line, it's, you can have the hub. It's much more difficult to do it on the other side of the line.
Oh. We're on the good side of the line.
so it's it takes a lot of infrastructure to have that. But I think also creating a community of trust and welcoming so that even if it's not all in one spot, people are not living in the shadows, and they are, they either have that, their child's teacher who they can turn to and ask for questions, or there's that helpful person at the county who they can go to apply for public benefits, or there's, your organization, there's here, Yankton Thrive, where they can come to if they need someone. And even if it is spread out, it really takes one connection, I think, for someone to go to and say, I need assistance. And if that one person then knows who to turn to, it may not be the most efficient, but I think that's probably a lot of how you are operating right now. I think that, it's important for you to evaluate what pieces of the puzzle are missing when it comes to direct service providers, and how can you find the missing pieces to provide the holistic approach of supports that immigrants need.
I also think, and this kind of goes to something you were talking about earlier, where sometimes there are, you get a specific case or you have a specific person and you run into a problem that might be institutional or just a practice where somebody doesn't know how to handle an immigrant situation, and then through advocacy, you find a solution for that problem. You learn something new, or work with that institution or organization to find a solution. I think communicating institutionally and communicating, that's what your organization helps with, is kind of getting that information out there regularly and consistently, so that way, maybe that one institution now has a solution through that one worker that worked that case, but being able to kind of disseminate that information so that, hey, now every version of that institution in town is aware of how to handle this situation if it comes up again. Because yes, cases are specific, but there are usually similarities and trends that can be addressed through systems and institutions like that.
And it's just helpful to know and hear. I mean, even as someone who's helped many different people on many different immigration tracks with all kinds of situations, I still don't know, I'm still learning things from them, and even then, like, there's new things changing at the federal level that then they have to keep up with. It's just helpful to know what are things that people are experiencing, and what does the track look like, and how long is it, and what can you do and can't you do at certain phases. And I think there are assumptions that it's just, just do what you're supposed to do. Okay, but everything that they just said in the last hour and a half is like 80% of what they're supposed to do, and that's hard to find, and it's hard to navigate, and it's hard to afford, and it's hard to be aware of. And so it's helpful as people who work with individuals in the community, and also working with the rest of the community, to know that information and to know how challenging it is, and just to have an idea of what are the things that need to happen and when to maybe support someone, or clear up what it is that they need to be doing. So.
When you think of those individuals in your community that have resources and touch points with those individuals, they're employers. What's the buy-in of employers across your city and region to support the continuing growing of that diverse population? Maybe employers can look at their EAD that the employee hands them and identify where kind of are they at. Individual, have a consultation paid for by the employer to meet with a law firm, so that you can understand what is your timeline, where are you at, what's next, and where do you need help. It then can either be up to the employer or the employee to then take on the added costs maybe down the road, but it's a really nice gesture for that employer to open that door, especially when they have those touch points. You want to promote growth and retention within your organization. $150 initial consultation is a drop in the bucket for an employer to keep that employee long-term. And so what's the buy-in? I think it's important that you consider what is the buy-in of those employers. And that even comes down to housing. That comes down to other resources available. Where are the gaps? How can employers that recognize the value add that these individuals and families have, how do they recognize that? Not only by their own time, but even some financial resources along the way. It's not a terribly big ask.
I'd certainly encourage that, but we've talked about it. There's gotta be an educational component. Because when I see them and they say to me, they try to, hopefully there's an interpreter there, but to explain that this piece of paper that they have is their driver's license. No, it's not. Or this piece of paper is the insurance on my car. No, it's not. We've had to add an entire separate session for non-English speaking defendants at least once a month, probably twice a month in our county in just the last year. That's how, because if we have to call an interpreter, it just drags out our other sessions. So we now have sessions that are just for the non-English speaking defendants. And usually it's things that they have no idea that they don't have the proper documentation, and they've been arrested and they don't know it. And most of them came here for a job. And I would love to tell the employers, you need to help these people out. They have no clue. I'm not gonna see them until they are arrested for breaking a law that they don't understand. And that's that's where we're at here in Yankton.
It's tough to get buy-in right now from employers that
It
are
is.
reaping the benefits of the workforce and educating the need for support to be able to keep that.
Like, yeah, in Huron, for example, where there's a huge Karen population too, where Cornerstone's headquarters are located, there are factories that pay like, they'll give like a $5,000 donation for the year, or they'll pay $500 or $1,000 a month to pay for English classes, so that we can keep giving English classes to their employee. We haven't found any sponsors like that yet here. But there's definitely people not speaking English working at almost all the factories. So yeah, we're still working on the whole employer buy-in part.
Yeah, and I think the one way to present it is there's natural turnover at a company, but how can you reduce that turnover by hiring employees who are going to be loyal to you for as long as they are able to work here? And if the employer can play an active role, a financial role in particular, in helping their employee go from a parolee to a permanent resident, then the employer is creating a framework for lower turnover. And you think about what are the costs for turnover. Maybe employers think like, oh, there is an abundance of workers, turnover is fine. Well, there are costs of training, there's costs of onboarding, there's costs to the HR department to process all of those changes. And there can be a lot of efficiencies made. There's a business argument to an employer to try and create a stable and secure workforce for their own good.
And also, I kind of think of how many $3,000 incentives, new hire incentives are out there. And even that $3,000 incentive to hire a new employee, if you could just use it to keep an employee.
It'll
Yeah.
help you become a permanent resident.
Which costs less than $3,000.
Less than,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to hear.
But worth more.
We have employers that are saying, come and work with us, you're hired, and the person shows up and they're like, well, you're not, you're hired. You have a waiting period, so find a place to live. We have a place, oh, your family? Sorry, your family can't stay. So find a place to live with no money, no connections, and then we'll let you know in a week or so when you can hire, but according to our rules, you have to be here for at least a certain amount of time in town before you can come in for your final interview or your hiring process. And it's been a nightmare for people, and a lot of people have left.
But yet before people come here, they can sign up for ESL classes and the trainings, right? Isn't that interesting?
So what I'm seeing too, and to your point about folks who maybe later down the line unfortunately run into sort of criminal situations that do have immigration impact, I think know your rights trainings become super important. And that's really outside of the scope of a lot of people, right? But working with, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations at large, like United We Dream, for example, is the largest undocumented youth network organization in the country. And they work with different towns and different organizations locally to be able to present these Know Your Rights trainings. So what from a immigration background, from housing perspective, from interactions with police. So sometimes it's okay to say, maybe this is beyond what we can offer right now. What are the other national organizations that are tackling this in other areas around the country that we maybe can apply locally? And we'll talk more about that, but there are organizations that do assist other folks with that.
What was the name of the organization again?
United We Dream. And so they specifically assist undocumented youth nationally, and so they're the largest youth network. I know, for example, in Florida, there's the Florida Immigrant Coalition, there is the Florida Immigrant Youth Network. There should be some local organizations in Iowa that do present these Know Your Rights trainings fairly regularly from different perspectives, again, from the immigration standpoint, from housing rights, from anything like that, to where we can also sort of give these individuals the agency to be able to also say, well, you know what, I know my rights, and you're telling me I can't do this, this, and that. No, I actually do know what I need to say or do. And so it's also empowering, I think, local communities to do it themselves as well, and having sort of a collaboration with organizations that can provide that information.
We receive that request a lot, not even just from that perspective, but employee rights.
Yeah.
You know, individuals are saying it would be good if we could educate the workforce on what their rights are as well.
And there are organizations and folks, and I'm sure somewhere in Iowa, I don't know locally, I just know in Florida, there are various immigrant organizations that specifically do that and assist in doing it either not for a cost at all, but there's things to explore in that regard to where, can sort of provide that.
I wonder if the South Dakota
I was just gonna say, I
Voices
bet
for
Tanisa does this
yeah,
training.
I think
I'm sure she
Tanisa.
does.
Mhm.
And I know they do it in Omaha too, so we wouldn't have to go too far either direction.
This might be a little bit more of a labor question, but I am curious, again, in Yankton, we have a lot of manufacturing, so safety concerns, and I know that those are not provided in multiple languages, it's only provided in English. And I think that's a huge risk to, whatever language you speak, that's a risk if you're working with someone that doesn't share the language. So I am curious, as far as employers are concerned, there's no legal requirements to provide certain types of trainings in someone's native language, or?
Outside
Sorry.
my wheelhouse.
I'm sure it depends on the state.
Yeah, I was like, I can't speak to a specific regulation, but it does kind of set off an alarm bell. I feel like that would be something, maybe in OSHA, probably a federal safety concern. It's a large OSHA manual, I haven't read the whole thing, but I'm willing to bet that that does sound like a safety concern and, a liability concern for employers too. Like again, saying to try to get buy-in from employers to address these things. If they're cutting costs on that by not keeping their workers informed and well-trained, they're at a liability where if somebody gets injured, they're gonna be paying, a lot more in workman's comp, a lot more in personal injury potentially.
Which is the business case for translating the damn training and safety materials,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Well, I just wanna speak up, I think that the employers are currently working on that, I know in Yankton they are.
Well, I know my husband works at a place and it's nothing.
Yeah, I do know of companies that are currently, especially the manufacturing business, which is an overhaul, right? Work instructions
Yeah.
and turning them into multiple locations, or languages, and they are doing it, and I know Debbie said that several years ago, she helped a company in Yankton translate into Spanish. Employee handbook, so, they're working towards it, obviously, some employers, I think, are behind the ball, let's be honest, the conversation here. As far as the federal labor law posters, we supply those free to employers, and they are in the language.
And everything that's put out by OSHA, you can get in Spanish.
Spanish,
All you have to do is switch the language, it's there.
And it's printed. They just have
Everything
to
by
do it
OSHA is in
right.
Spanish, and
Yeah.
other languages too.
Yeah.
But some employers are actually using that as an excuse not to hire people that don't speak
Very-
Spanish.
very
Because
true.
that's what they'll say. They'll say, well, we don't have our safety stuff in Spanish, so we can't hire them if they can't read it in English.
Yeah.
And so, but then other employers are starting to translate it so that they can, and others just haven't, like you said. They're all over the place.
They're
Some
all
of them
over the
have
place,
everything in multiple languages, and then don't.
I think we're at a point with, our growth of population, and when I've presented about, we've had huge growth in population, like, man, immigrants have been here for a long time. That's the exact words that I've heard, back, and I'm like, well, but this is a huge influx, and Yankton's finally having to start addressing some of the barriers and concerns, and so, when you say the, know your rights trainings, and I'm envisioning, rolling that out to the people that are coming here, newcomers, but then also it's important for the businesses, organizations to know the rights of the individuals here, and I think that that's sometimes the piece that we're missing, is it's not the newcomers that don't know the rights, it's the other people that don't know the rights of the newcomers, that then we need to implement for the infrastructure, what they need to be doing, like providing legal services in a language that's accessible to them, federal right, and, even with, the school district has a lot of stuff that they're working on, they have an ESL program, but it is a federal law that you have to have English teacher certified individuals. Sink or swim is not legal by federal law. And so there's things that you have to know as the businesses, organizations, of the rights of the people you're providing to, and I think that that's kind of where we are.
district or the county or whatever is that, you know, we are making things accessible, you know. I know the school districts is adding, you know, all of their ESL stuff, but there's a lack of resources to do that. And I know LSS is here, but we're desperate for interpreters, and right now there's one available to come to court. And when she doesn't come, we have to call language line, which the judges don't wanna do, they want an in-person interpreter. But she's not available outside of that service because the county's paying for that service. So when I ask her to help me out, which she's very glad to do since she's a former student, technically the county's paying for that, and they shouldn't be, because she's.
Or she's working unpaid,
Or
which is
she's
also not
working
right.
unpaid, which is not, and so it's just the resources aren't
And I
there.
think that what it has been is the few that were here, it was like, oh, but there's only a couple, so we don't have to provide the services. Now that there's so many, you can't avoid it, okay, we have to provide these services, but now it's cost of providing the services and accessibility, especially to interpreting or multilingual individuals within what needs to be done. And like Debbie and I were just, you know, we were discussing too, we're strategizing, we're planning for gigs, we have big plans. But we were talking about, you know, there are fully bilingual English proficient individuals that are within the professions, just not here. So is there a pipeline, whether it's from Florida saying instead, you know, yes, there are a lot of newcomers coming here to the manufacturing ground level entry jobs, but there are individuals who are bilingual in the southern states that are professionals in their job. Could we market to them to come to then have those jobs be accessible to the people that are coming that don't have the professional stuff, that have the language, you know, why can't we get someone within the clerk's office or, you know, anything that is a professional in that, but also bilingual. And because they're not here, it doesn't mean that we can't get them here, whether it's resourcing or the individuals that are coming then out of the school system or out of the universities that are bilingual to then turn them and like making incentives for them to be able to be hired then to meet some of these goals. And then it's not paying a bunch more for interpreters in addition to your worker's bilingual, pay them more than the person who's not bilingual. And it's not more, you know, there's solutions, we're just not there.
I think the idea is like building a bridge.
Yeah.
You know, like one brick at a time, but building a bridge. And some of those folks who like have sort of the cultural expertise, the language expertise, can be some of those like bridge people, helping to connect newcomers to this already very established community.
And
but
it's like we have a lot of the services that are great services provided in English. And it's not that I'm, you know, and great employers and opportunities, but it's that we need to make them accessible is our gap. That's our missing piece.
And as somebody who came from Miami about 2 months ago to the Midwest, I can say that there is an interest, I think, from a lot of young Latino professionals who are second, third generation that are looking to expand sort of their careers and then also being able to service other communities. Folks are already being recruited out of Miami. I came with an interest of sort of expanding my knowledge of immigration law and to also, in the future, practice somewhere else other than a southern jurisdiction out in Florida, right? And so that was my interest, and I'm sure in whether it's translation, whether it's medical professionals, whatever the case may be, there are folks in Florida who are interested to come out and sort of fit that need that you guys are seeing right now, that have that dual identity and that dual understanding of what the community needs, and then maybe also what the employer needs and what the different stakeholders sort of are asking for at this point. But that's something.
In a way that's multilingual and accessible linguistically to the individuals that are hired and also serviced here.
Yeah, and think about the strengths of Yankton. If they're coming from Miami and Dallas, Texas, I bet Yankton is a lot more affordable. I bet their commute is much shorter. I bet like the quality of life and family environment is better. It's safer, right?
That's a big comment that we've heard from a lot of people, and even the rural aspect. Cuba was where they came from, was rural.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is comfortable for them.
They
They
wanna
don't like
stay
city.
here. They don't even wanna go to Sioux Falls. Like like so many Cuban immigrants, like they're just, they don't wanna leave Yankton. This is exactly what they want. They don't even wanna go to Sioux Falls. They wanna stay here. They want more job opportunity here. And I know that, like, the English part is just killing them. I mean, cause I hear this all the time through you Melkies, that like, they want a job, they wanna work, they wanna be successful. That is, I mean, that is just such an amazing thing that I'm always trying to translate to other groups of people in the community, you know, everywhere else. They're just so hardworking. But they wanna stay here. They wanna be in the rural areas of South Dakota, which is so unique. But Sioux Falls is huge to them.
Yeah.
You know, and I grew up in Sioux Falls, so like, I think it's little.
And I've worked with clients, so before this, I was working with clients in detention centers, so like my niche before I graduated was sort of in removal defense, and I work with detention centers out in Jacksonville, Florida, and in Miami, and a lot of our clients who had sort of lived out in the Midwest and then came back to Miami, ran into some trouble or went into removal proceedings, and they told me, I love the Midwest, like I love the environment, I love the culture, I love how calm it is, and so they worked out here, they know the experience, but sort of have this connection to Miami because the reality is that that's where the hub is. That is where culture is, that's where family is. So it's gonna take some time to develop that, where there are resources, there is an environment that is able to sort of welcome folks to the extent where they feel like they wanna stay and can, right? But it's gonna take time and I think multiple conversations.
And one thing we talked about a little bit earlier too is the fact that, you know, this is a very recent trend. It's like the last 10 years or so, there's been this big influx of immigration here to Yankton. Well, you know, 5-10 more years down the line, you're gonna have all these kids that are in school, graduating, becoming young professionals themselves. So setting them up for success to, you know, fill these gaps when they become of age to work. You know, they're gonna be bilingual, growing up in a Spanish-speaking household and going through these ESL programs that Cornerstone is providing, that the school district is providing now. They will have these skill sets, and making sure that they understand that that is an asset. We discussed how sometimes being a non-English speaker and going through ESL, it can feel a little bit like, you know, your lack of English knowledge is a bit of, your Spanish is kind of a problem that you're trying to overcome. But then once you get on the other side, once you graduate as a bilingual student, as a bilingual graduate, now your Spanish is an asset. And there's needs to be met with that, and making sure that they understand that, you know, they have a leg up, they have a lot more opportunities, especially here where there are these needs in so many aspects of the community that they would be able to fill in more ways than one.
Yeah. And this is, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to just share this one thing I'm smiling about, because Janaea is here from California and she's bilingual, and I'm going, I bet you're going, I didn't realize how much of an asset that is.
Yeah, and myself, like I am an immigrant. I was in ESL for 3 years. I have just graduated law school. I'm a first generation college graduate, first generation lawyer. Like there is possibility there. It just will take, I think, time, and it will take resources, it will take conversation. And I think you guys are on the right track, right? It just takes time.
Another issue that we have, and it's not something that we will address today, but I always like to share within our community, it's not just the language barrier, it's digital literacy is another issue that we will have to address in time.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Digital literacy, so knowing how to, I didn't realize this, I have been saying it, you know, Cuba doesn't have computers, they don't have internet, and I asked somebody just this week, I go, am I telling people correctly, because they're here from Cuba, and they're like, we were lucky to have electricity.
Yeah.
So, yes, we don't, we can
What's a QR code?
I keep my mom's passwords in an Excel sheet, so I feel your pain.
Yeah.
So I understand, that's like a universal, like, Cuban parents who are like slightly, you know, just in general, it's a normal thing.
and everything here is apply online.
Yeah, correct.
And that's a barrier.
And again, like the whole premise of this is there are things that we can improve upon. This is a positive thing. The fact that we're having conversations and we're aware of things that we can fix is a good thing. And it's just gonna take some work farther on, but we have to have the foresight, which is now. And so we have to be talking about it, and then we have to be doing things. And this is not a negative thing. This is a thing that people are here, and let's make it even better than what it is.
Well, and I feel very glad to have like Jacob on our team. I think having being able to have the passion to work with immigrants, but also have that, like, those deep roots in the region is so valuable. Cece's expertise is super interesting as well. Her background and experiences are one of a kind, it feels like. And Garrett has that expertise working with employers and advising them on, how do you think strategically about building up an international workforce the right way? And I think we feel energized to be part of these conversations. It's exciting to think about the very wide-reaching potential of this community, Yankton. And so, to the extent that we can be a positive player in these conversations, we're happy to lend our knowledge and expertise however it would be helpful to this community.
You must have been way more persuasive than I was. So I had a conversation with Mr. Beese over the summer and was desperate to get him back here to. So kudos to you.
Well, we also got him back here, Doug.
I'm within arm's reach. I'll be coming back and forth.
That's why Jacob wanted to come back here so bad.
I don't know if he knew he'd be seeing me, but I was like, we had some long conversations about what Yankton needed and how valuable it is to have people that, and Sarah's the same, former colleague. They exist, they're just, when we call and we're just desperate for help, I'm sure everyone will pitch in, but it's a huge need that, we just.
And I really do think it takes coming together. You can't, no one of us can tackle this within our work within your place of employment by yourself. It's gonna take a lot of brains coming together and making some plans to make it effective. You can't tackle it on your own.
Yeah, and I'll say, I was definitely tempted by our discussions to come right to Yankton, but I did want to bring Erin into this as well, because she has a lot of expertise, especially working in this region with immigration law, and I've only been with the firm for 3 months almost, not quite 3 months, and I've already feel like I'm learning so much and am in that process, and I'm excited to continue developing, and I'm glad that you and Kivu as a firm are willing to take my suggestion here and get connected in Yankton, because there's a lot to be done, and like you said, it's complicated. It takes a village, takes many voices, and keeping those conversations going is crucial. I know Erin earlier said an analogy of like building a bridge, and I was thinking about how it can be frustrating going back and forth, because it's easy to if you have a half-built bridge, you're going to have the people who are working on building that bridge are going to think that took a lot of work. But the people who want to cross over that bridge are going to look at it and say, I can't get over this bridge. Why is there a half-built bridge here? They're going to be mad about it. They're complaining. And both sides, it makes sense, because one has a need that's not yet being met, and they get frustrated if progress is slow. And they might not see people working on it, even if it's, every day there's a little bit more progress on it. They're not seeing the people out there doing that work, but it is getting done, and it's important to stay motivated and stay engaged, because it is so worthwhile, and I just know Yankton is going to benefit so much from this group here and these conversations, and I'm excited to see where the community ends up going forward.
And the bridge analogy right at the 100-year anniversary of the Meridian Bridge.
It's
It's
a plan.
I thought that was off the cuff.
It was.
Could you confirm, I
Just grew up around so many bridges. It just comes naturally.
I don't know if it's that.
Maybe Lacey would know.
Lacey,
Oh, I'm
how many
sorry.
job openings would you say we have right now in Yankton?
In Yankton specifically, I wouldn't know the exact numbers. I know statewide it's like 20,000 jobs.
Which is in perspective.
800.
We were at
Yeah.
800, then 600, some have kind of,
Yeah, I
Back
would say
off
there
of
is a
hiring.
slowdown right now.
I would say
Specifically in
400.
the manufacturing
But-
industry.
There's
Yeah.
another manufacturer who hadn't hired all year, who now has 18 job openings just this week.
Yeah,
So, yeah, there's still a high need, there's plenty of
there's still
jobs
people
out there.
hiring, for sure. Yep.
And is there a way with data to know why there's job openings? Like, is it people leaving, and if they're leaving, why? You know, like, to get to, is it
Growth,
lack of
expansion,
There's expansion, there's
just
retirement.
expansion?
retirement.
Okay.
I mean, baby
Other
boomers
big-
are
other stuff.
retiring. That's a huge thing right now, right? You're seeing them leave the workforce.
But
And
there's
knowing
a lot
those
of,
trends is
lot of
helpful.
growth,
Lot of
there's
growth,
new lines
expansion.
coming in, production lines. Manitou just had a huge expansion.
Yeah, Dave Zimmerman is hiring, I mean, they,
Mhm.
what, 30-some employees?
So we do have a lot of, positive happening here in Yankton, and that's one thing I, again, mentioned, you know, until we can address some of the language concerns, it is kind of creating a bottleneck for some of the employers. And that needs to be addressed as well.
Thanks.
Well, thank you all for participating in this conversation and discussion. And again, thank you to Rita and all for inviting us and having us today.